Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Golden Age of Piracy. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into the absolutely wild, incredible, and downright terrifying story of Edward Teach. But you probably know him better as Blackbeard. And let me tell you right off the bat, this guy's story is so crazy, so over the top, that if someone made it into a movie, you'd probably walk out thinking, yeah, right, that's way too unrealistic. But here's the thing. It's all true, and it's even crazier than you think. So picture this scene for a moment. You're a merchant sailor in 1717, just trying to make an honest living hauling cargo through the warm, beautiful waters of the Caribbean. The sun is shining, the trade winds are perfect, and you're probably thinking about the bonus you'll get when you deliver your goods safely to port. Life's good, right? Then suddenly, your lookout starts screaming from the crow's nest. There's a ship on the horizon, and it's flying the dreaded black flag. But as this ship gets closer, you realize this isn't just any pirate vessel. This is something straight out of your worst nightmares. Standing on the deck of this approaching ship is this absolutely massive figure of a man. We're talking about someone who stood well over 6 feet tall in an era when the average man was maybe 5'6". His beard is so black and so thick it literally reaches down to his chest. And here's where it gets really crazy. There's actual smoke rising from his hair. Not metaphorically, not as some kind of optical illusion, literal smoke. Because this madman had woven pieces of hemp rope and slow-burning matches into his beard and hair, and he'd light them before every battle. Can you even imagine seeing that coming at you across the water? The guy looked like he'd sailed straight up from hell itself. Now here's where Blackbeard's story gets really interesting, because despite being probably the most famous pirate who ever lived, we know almost nothing about Edward Teach's early life. And I mean nothing. Historians have been arguing about this for centuries. Some say he was born in Bristol, England around 1680. Others think he might have been from Jamaica, or maybe the Carolinas. There are even theories that he could have been Welsh or Scottish. The truth is, before he became Blackbeard, Edward Teach was just another face in the crowd, which, when you think about it, makes his transformation into this legendary figure even more remarkable. What we do know with some certainty is that Teach probably got his start in the maritime world as a privateer during Queen Anne's War, which ran from 1702 to 1713. Now, if you're not familiar with privateering, let me explain because it's actually a fascinating concept. Privateers were basically government-approved pirates. Countries would issue these documents called letters of marque that gave civilian ship captains official permission to attack and capture enemy vessels during wartime. It was like having a license to steal, except it was completely legal and you were considered a patriot for doing it. The government got a cut of whatever you captured, you got to keep the rest, and everybody was happy. Well, everybody except the people getting robbed, but that's war for you. But then Queen Anne's War ended in 1713 with the Treaty of Utrecht, and suddenly thousands of privateers found themselves out of work. Imagine being really, really good at something, in this case attacking ships and taking their stuff, and then being told, thanks, but we don't need you anymore. Time to find a nice, quiet job on land. A lot of these guys had been doing this for over a decade. They had no other skills, no other way to make a living. So what did they do? Well, if you were Edward Teach, you just kept doing what you'd always done, except now it was called piracy instead of privateering. This is when Teach's path crossed with Captain Benjamin Hornigold, sometime around 1716. Now Hornigold was already a big name in the piracy world, and he was operating out of what had become the unofficial pirate capital of the world, Nassau in the Bahamas. And let me paint you a picture of what Nassau was like in those days because it was absolutely wild. The official government had basically collapsed, leaving the island effectively lawless. The harbor was perfect for pirates because it was surrounded by shallow waters and sandbars that made it almost impossible for large naval warships to get close enough to attack. Plus, it was perfectly positioned along the major shipping routes between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Nassau had become what historians now call the Pirate Republic. There were literally thousands of pirates based there, living in a strange kind of democratic society where they elected their own leaders and made their own laws. Imagine walking through the streets and seeing pirates from every corner of the world, English, French, Spanish, Dutch, African, Caribbean, all united by their rejection of traditional society and their pursuit of freedom and fortune on the high seas. It was like the world's most dangerous international community. Under Hornigold's mentorship, Edward Teach learned everything there was to know about the pirate trade. And this guy was a natural. He was smart, he was fearless, he was a born leader, and he had this incredible ability to inspire both loyalty and terror in people. Hornigold recognized his potential immediately, and by 1717, he'd given Teach command of his own ship. This was when Edward Teach officially began his transformation into the legendary Blackbeard. Blackbeard's first major score came when he captured a French slave ship called La Concorde off the island of Martinique. Now, this wasn't just some random merchant vessel. This was a serious warship. We're talking about a 200-ton, three-masted beauty with 26 cannons and the ability to carry over 300 people. When Blackbeard saw this ship, he knew he'd found his flagship. He captured it, renamed it Queen Anne's Revenge, and began converting it into the most feared pirate ship in the Caribbean. But Blackbeard wasn't content with just 26 cannons. This guy had big plans, and he needed big firepower to back them up. He spent months upgrading the Queen Anne's Revenge, eventually mounting 40 cannons on it. To put that in perspective, most pirate ships had maybe 10 or 12 cannons. Naval frigates typically had 20 to 30. Blackbeard had created what was essentially a floating fortress, bristling with enough firepower to take on entire fleets of merchant ships or even challenge naval vessels. But here's what made Blackbeard truly brilliant. He understood that, in the piracy business, reputation was everything. The more terrifying people thought you were, the more likely they were to surrender without a fight. And fighting was expensive. You lost men, you damaged your ship, you used up ammunition and supplies. Much better to just scare people into giving up immediately. So Blackbeard set out to create the most terrifying image possible. And boy, did he succeed. The smoking beard was just the beginning of his carefully crafted image of terror. This guy would strap 6 or 8 loaded pistols across his chest before going into battle. He'd carry multiple cutlasses, daggers, and other weapons. He'd dress in the finest clothes he could steal from captured merchants, silk coats, expensive hats, jewelry, the works. The effect was this weird combination of sophisticated gentleman and supernatural demon. People described him as looking like the devil himself, but the devil with really good fashion sense. And his crew, oh man, his crew was this incredible mix of people from every possible background. You had former Navy sailors who'd deserted, merchant seamen who'd been captured and decided to join up, escaped slaves who saw piracy as their path to freedom, indentured servants who'd run away from their masters, religious refugees, political exiles, criminals, adventurers. Basically anyone who had a reason to reject conventional society and try to make it on their own terms. What's really fascinating about pirate crews is how democratic they were. This was the 18th century. Remember, a time when most of the world was ruled by kings and queens, when social mobility was almost impossible, when ordinary people had no say in how they were governed. But pirate ships were run like floating democracies. The crew would vote on who their captain would be, and they could vote him out if they didn't like his leadership. They'd vote on which ships to attack, how to divide up the loot, what rules to follow. Even someone as powerful and intimidating as Blackbeard had to maintain the support of his men, or they'd simply elect someone else to replace him. By 1718, Blackbeard had assembled a small fleet of ships under his command and had essentially taken control of the shipping lanes around the Carolinas. But his most audacious move, the one that really announced to the world that Blackbeard was a force to be reckoned with, was when he decided to blockade the entire port of Charleston, South Carolina. Think about the sheer audacity of this. Charleston was one of the most important ports in colonial America, a major hub of trade and commerce. And here's this one pirate with just a few ships, essentially holding an entire city hostage. For over a week, Blackbeard's fleet sat outside Charleston Harbor, stopping every ship that tried to enter or leave. They captured several vessels, including one carrying some very prominent Charleston citizens. The whole city was in panic. Trade ground to a halt. The colonial government was helpless. They had no naval forces capable of challenging Blackbeard's fleet. And here's the crazy part, Blackbeard's demands weren't even for gold or silver or jewels. He wanted a chest of medical supplies. That's it. Just medicine. And this tells us something really important about pirate life that often gets overlooked in all the romanticized stories. These guys were constantly dealing with injuries, diseases, infections, and medical emergencies. When you're living by violence on the high seas, far from any doctors or hospitals, a good supply of medicine could literally be the difference between life and death. Blackbeard understood this, and he knew that keeping his crew healthy was more important than any treasure. But all of this success was making Blackbeard some very powerful and very angry enemies. Colonial governors throughout the region were under intense pressure from merchants, ship owners, and the British government to do something about this pirate problem. The economic damage was enormous. Insurance rates for shipping were skyrocketing. Trade routes were being abandoned. Entire ports were living in fear. Something had to be done. Governor Alexander Spotswood of Virginia was particularly determined to end Blackbeard's reign of terror. This guy was ambitious, politically savvy, and he saw hunting down Blackbeard as his ticket to fame and advancement in the colonial government. But there was a problem. Blackbeard wasn't operating in Virginia waters. He was based in North Carolina, and the governor there, Charles Eden, was rumored to be taking bribes from pirates in exchange for protection. So Spotswood decided to take matters into his own hands. In secret, he organized what was essentially a military assassination mission. He hired 2 small, fast sloops and put them under the command of Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy. Maynard was young, ambitious, and eager to make a name for himself. Spotswood offered a massive reward, £100 for Blackbeard's head, which was more money than most people would see in a lifetime. Now here's where the story gets really ironic. In June of 1718, Blackbeard had actually accepted a royal pardon from Governor Eden of North Carolina. Officially, legally, he was no longer a pirate. He'd settled down in a house on Ocracoke Island, married a local girl, his 14th wife by some accounts, and was supposedly living the quiet life of a reformed privateer. But old habits die hard, and the lure of easy money was too strong to resist. By November of 1718, Blackbeard was back to his old tricks, attacking small vessels and merchant ships around the Outer Banks of North Carolina. He was operating with just one ship now, a smaller sloop called the Adventure, and a crew of only about 20 men. Maybe he thought he was being careful, flying under the radar. Maybe he thought his pardon would protect him. Or maybe he just couldn't help himself. Whatever the reason, it was about to cost him everything. On November 21, 1718, Lieutenant Maynard's 2 sloops arrived at Ocracoke Inlet, where Blackbeard was anchored. The Adventure was trapped in the shallow waters of the inlet, with no room to maneuver and no way to escape. Blackbeard knew this was it, his final battle. That night, according to witnesses, he threw a massive party on his ship, drinking and celebrating with his crew, as if he knew it might be their last night alive. The battle began at dawn on November 22nd. Blackbeard tried to use his knowledge of the local waters to his advantage, luring Maynard's larger ships into the shallows where they might run aground. He fired a devastating broadside that killed or wounded about a third of Maynard's men, including the captain of one of the sloops. For a moment, it looked like the notorious pirate might escape one more time. But Maynard was clever and determined. He ordered most of his surviving men to hide below deck, making his ship look almost deserted. When Blackbeard saw what appeared to be an easy target, he made a fatal mistake. He decided to board the sloop personally and finish off the survivors in hand-to-hand combat. It was a trap, and he walked right into it. What happened next was like something out of an epic movie. As soon as Blackbeard and his men jumped aboard Maynard's sloop, the hidden sailors burst up from below deck, and the ship erupted in violent, chaotic combat. Pistols firing, cutlasses clashing, men screaming and fighting for their lives in the confined space of the ship's deck. And in the middle of it all, Blackbeard and Lieutenant Maynard faced off in what would become one of the most famous duels in pirate history. Both men drew their pistols and fired simultaneously. Maynard's shot hit home, but Blackbeard kept coming. The two men drew their swords and began fighting, with Blackbeard's massive cutlass against Maynard's more nimble naval sword. Blackbeard was wounded but fighting like a man possessed, and he actually managed to break Maynard's sword with a powerful blow. Just as he was about to deliver the killing stroke, one of Maynard's sailors came up behind him and slashed his throat. But even that wasn't enough to stop Blackbeard. This guy was superhuman in his final moments. Even with his throat cut, even bleeding from multiple wounds, he continued fighting. It took a total of 25 wounds to finally bring him down, 5 pistol shots and 20 cuts from various swords and knives. When they examined his body later, they found he'd been shot 5 times and slashed 20 times, and he'd kept fighting until literally the last second of his life. After the battle, Lieutenant Maynard did something that would cement Blackbeard's legend forever. He ordered the pirate's head to be cut off and hung from the bowsprit of his ship like some kind of gruesome trophy. Can you imagine sailing back to port with Blackbeard's severed head swaying in the wind? It was brutal, it was dramatic, and it sent a crystal-clear message to every pirate in the Caribbean. The age of Blackbeard was over. But here's the thing that absolutely blows my mind. Even though Blackbeard's reign lasted only about 2 years, his death basically ended the entire Golden Age of piracy. Think about that for a second. One man's death brought down an entire era. Without his terrifying reputation striking fear into the hearts of merchant sailors, without his tactical genius inspiring other pirates, without his larger-than-life presence holding the whole pirate world together, everything just started falling apart. Other pirate captains suddenly found it much harder to get ships to surrender without a fight. Colonial governments got bolder about sending out pirate hunters. The British Navy stepped up their patrols. It was like Blackbeard had been the keystone holding up this entire criminal empire, and when he fell, the whole thing came crashing down. But here's what's really incredible. We're still talking about this guy over 300 years later. I mean, seriously, when you think pirate, whose image pops into your head? It's Blackbeard, right? The big black beard, the smoking hair, the multiple pistols. He's become the template for every pirate character in every movie, book, TV show, and video game ever made. And the craziest part? In 1996, marine archaeologists actually found what they believe is the wreck of Queen Anne's Revenge off the coast of North Carolina. They've been pulling up artifacts for decades now: cannons, medical instruments, gold dust, even a urethral syringe used for treating certain diseases that pirates might pick up in port. These discoveries have given us an incredible window into what pirate life was really like. So what's the takeaway from all this? Edward Teach started as nobody special, just another face in the crowd in colonial America. But through sheer force of personality,